We are joined now by fellow ADH TV host and the National Director of the Family First Party, Lyle Shelton. Lyle, welcome to Spectator TV.
Thanks, Ellie. Good to be with you.
Last week we saw former Prime Minister Scott Morrison give his valedictory address to Parliament, and in it you note that he was keen to play up his Judeo-Christian roots. Morrison said, and I quote, "We stand on the values that built our successful free society. All of these stem from the core principle of respect for individual human dignity, as does representative democracy and even a market-based capitalist economy. This is a uniquely Judeo-Christian principle." End quote. Now that sounds good, but Lyle, Morrison's speech has frustrated you. Why is that?
Yeah, it has, Ellie. Look, the words are fine. They are noble. They are true. And they are what Australia needs to hear, in my humble opinion, whether people share the Christian or Judeo faiths or not, because those are the values of our society. I guess the problem I have with it is that Scott Morrison was in the Parliament for 17 years, 3 as Prime Minister, and as Paul Kelly from The Australian also noted, has only now chosen to champion his deepest held beliefs. He's always talked about his personal faith, but to call the nation back to this right as he's departing the Parliament, I think is a little bit disappointing, particularly when he didn't stand up on issues like same-sex marriage, like human rights for the unborn. He threw campaigners for women's rights like Catherine Deves and Claire Chandler under the bus. The list goes on. So I'm just disappointed. It's one thing to talk about the values. It's another thing to live them out when you actually have the opportunity to be a parliamentarian and a Prime Minister.
Well, it's not just Morrison who had the opportunity for more than 17 years. It's also the coalition who were governing the country. Now, they didn't leave a single trace of these principles on Australia or lay a single claw on the left's sacred cows like the ABC or the university sector. Now, Lyle, when you say that you'd like to see figures like Morrison translate their faith into political advocacy, a lot of blue ribbon Liberals get nervous. Now, I presume you're not talking about a theocracy. What sort of advocacy would you like to see, instead of the Morrison era, what would you like to see the next Liberal leadership go for in terms of displaying this faith in their political activism?
Yeah, well, you're quite right. People like me, and I'm an out and proud Christian, if you're allowed to be out and proud about Christianity in this day and age, certainly not looking for a theocracy. We do live in a democracy, but the beauty of a democracy is that we have the ability and the privilege to propose things for the public good. And I would propose, and I think Morrison was proposing on his way out, that the Judeo-Christian ethic is a good thing for Australia. So I would like to see the next Liberal leadership pick up on that theme, because I think what we're seeing with the rise of cultural Marxism, it's an alternative religious worldview, if I can put it that way. I think you could make the case that cultural Marxism is a religion, certainly has religious overtones. We need to, as a society, choose what is the religious or philosophical base of our nation. And of course, that basis for Australia and Western civilization was the Judeo-Christian ethic. It's given us the rule of law, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, a whole bunch of good things, free market capitalism, etc., has come from this ethic. And we are at a crossroads as to whether we continue with this as our underpinning value system or not. And good on Morrison for suggesting we should go back to it. And I think certainly Peter Dutton and his colleagues should pick this up, as indeed should the Labor Party.
Well, I mean, the left are always talking about demanding that religion be left out of politics. But I think you have a point in your article when you say that what we are witnessing from the Greens, the Teals, and indeed the Labor Party is a religious political advocacy in the name of various left-wing belief systems. Now, the cult of climate change is the obvious example. It's basically a death cult. But some of the ideologies adopted by these parties are very similar to religious fervour. Even the DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, is a political belief system attempting to manipulate society based upon left-wing philosophy. Now, Lyle, I never hear anyone, not the ABC and not the Liberal Party, accuse the left of bringing faith into politics. But they are, aren't they?
They are absolutely bringing faith and, transcendent type concepts with religious fervour. And I would include the left of the Liberal Party in that Labor, Green, Teal menagerie that you just put there. There's a quad that runs Australia, and it includes the left of the Liberal Party, the so-called moderates. These are people who believe that your biological gender transcends biology and has this spiritual sense of something that's not connected to its biology, with the whole gender fluid ideology. That's a religious thing. It takes on spiritual overtones. The environmental aspects, the Gaia that Bob Brown, who the founder of the Greens, talks about, and so many Greens go on about, that is a spiritual concept. Now, no one ever says you have to leave Gaia at the door of the Senate, but if you're someone who comes from the Christian perspective, well, that's verboten, and you've got to expunge that from the public square and have this naked public square. So, our politics is writ with hypocrisy. Someone's values are going to be the underpinning of the nation's. We've got to decide democratically which of those values it will be.
Well, when we talk about the culture wars in Parliament, it could largely be described as the left's political cults attempting to unseat the quiet and unassuming Christian ethos that went into the construction of our political system. And now when you read about the speeches from our early prime ministers, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, they did contain reverence for founding Christian principles behind democracy. Now, the left's spiritual war is as much against Christianity as it is against the philosophy of Western civilization. Now, I make this point because Morrison is the one who famously distanced himself from the culture wars. Said he didn't want to get into the idea of fighting for things like free speech. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, Lyle, but at its soul and by its very definition, politics itself is a culture war. So what are we going to do if the Conservatives don't want to actually play politics?
Look, you've hit the nail on the head, Ellie, and this goes to the heart of my deep frustration with Scott Morrison. No doubt that he loves God and reads his Bible and prays, things that good religious Christian people do. But there's anyone who knows anything about theology, Christianity and faith knows that it's got to be consistent through all of life. It's got to be coherent across all of life. And yes, there is a culture war that's going on, and Scott Morrison chose to sit out of the same-sex marriage debate. He chose not to fight for City Point Christian College when it was putting forward a policy to protect its students from males, its female students from males identifying as girls and wanting to play their sports and be in their change rooms. He when questioned by the media, he said, "I don't share those views." He signed a letter supporting abortion. Now, that's the ultimate front to human dignity. It's one thing for him to wax lyrical in his valedictory speech about Judeo-Christian ethics and human dignity, which, of course, the Judeo-Christian ethic gives us this idea that all human life is sacred, no matter how small you are, signs a letter supporting abortion to birth laws in Australia. So this was very inconsistent, and we do need people who will fight for the values, not just talk about them, but actually fight for them and advocate for them within the constraints, obviously, of our democratic system.
I think it's funny, I think I said this to James Allen or somebody else on Spectator TV, that the cultural icons of our Western civilization are actually a chainsaw-wielding Argentinian and a Canadian who likes to eat apples in front of the press to torment them. They're the ones who are leading the game at the moment, not Australia, which is a real shame. Now, I think the majority of people know that something has gone wrong with civilization. They might not be exactly sure what it is that's gone wrong, but there is a wave of degeneracy in our schools, on our streets, in our corporations. I mean, you don't have to be a prude to know there's something wrong with an adult man in fishnets gyrating in front of kids. And also, we don't really need to have these endless welcome to country sessions every time we walk into a building. This has all gone horribly, horribly wrong. Now, is the answer to reassert Christian values, or do we have to be very careful that that doesn't push the irreligious people, there's a lot of them who are blue ribbon conservatives, away? Do we need to sort of approach this from a rebuilding Western civilization stance and go back to some of our core shared moral values?
Yes, I think that's right. I don't think it's up to people like myself to foster my Christian faith onto individuals. People should be free. Christianity or any faith worth its salt is not a coerced faith. But we do have to, as a society, work out, well, what are the shared values? What do we agree on? What is it that we were founded on? What is the wellspring for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, rule of law, our free market system, a fair trial, checks and balances on power? What we're seeing at the moment is the left wanting to assert itself and it has very strong totalitarian impulses. Now, this is antithetical to the Judeo-Christian heritage that we have inherited, because that says, no, there should be checks on powers. And that goes all the way back to Magna Carta. It goes to the way that the parliamentary system was constructed, so that, there's two houses, there's a review of legislation. No one just has untrammeled power. No government has untrammeled power to ram things through the parliament. All of these things came from our Judeo-Christian ethos. Now, that's fine. If we want to walk away from that and adopt some cultural Marxist view of the world or some other philosophy, that's fine, but let's just do it with our eyes open.
It's funny,
I don't think we're doing it with our eyes open.
I think it's worth noting that the left think that if we get rid of Western civilization and our system that belongs to the crown, and they'll get rid of all the Christian faith, okay, that's fine. But then think about this. Most of the republics out there in the world become Islamic socialist republics. And so you're not going to get rid of religion that way. And in fact, you become in danger of being governed by a theocracy if you're not very, very careful. Whereas Christianity is very passive in our political system. It takes a back seat. It's more like a founding principle than anything else. But just really quickly here at the end, is there any shining light? Do you see any hope amongst the coalition right now who are going to actually do this and fight the culture wars for people?
Look, there's obviously some terrific individuals, not just in the coalition, but across the parliament. And, I could name names like Senator Alexandra, Matt Canavan, Malcolm Roberts in One Nation, whilst I'm not saying all of these guys are necessarily Christians, but they are people that are fighting for the values, which, are the values of our founding. So there's some bright lights there, but I don't see any bright lights in terms of the institution of the Liberal Party itself, or of the Labor Party. And I think that's the great shame in our body politic. We lack leadership. We lack confidence in our leadership about who we are and where we're going as a nation. And that's, look, good on Morrison for calling this out, but he had his chance, and it's a shame that he didn't take it when he had his moment in the parliament.
Yeah, it's kind of like how the Liberals are now talking about nuclear energy, but only after they lost power, not before, when they really should have been doing it. I'm going to get you a pitchfork, Lyle, so that you can go and start fighting the culture wars. I'm going to mail it off to you. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Always a pleasure, Ellie. Thank you.